They tell some lies about college football, some big lies. Some are bigger than others, immunity, but I want to go down an entire list that I asked you to help me with last week, whenever June 19th was. It wasn't that long ago, actually. That was Monday, yeah. So I asked you guys, hey, what are some of the biggest lies that you think they tell about college football? Now, I gave you a few, and I've told you a few on this show for a long time. For example, I think the biggest lie in college football is you are what your record says you are. Because we simply know that's not true. In pro sports, it is true. In college football, I could be 10-2, you could be 12-0. That doesn't tell the whole story. You may have played just a list of tomato cans. I may have played 8 of the top 25 teams in the country. My 10-2 could be remarkably better than your 12-0. So you aren't always what your record says you are. But I've hashed that out with you 9 ways from Sunday. A win is a win. Technically is true. But in the grander scheme of things, that's also a lie. A win is a win, a loss is a loss. If I lose by 1 point to Georgia and you win by 1 point against Toledo, these are not the same things. I accomplished more than you did. And in the eyes of any rational committee member at the end of a year when we're trying to seed a playoff system, I think they would see it as such. But sometimes you get the old bumper sticker fortune cookie mentality of, nope, if it doesn't fit perfectly in a soundbite or on a screenshot, it doesn't make sense. People think that way in politics. They think that way in college football. They think that way in life. And most of the time, it's not true. So those are 2 of the big lies we talk about all the time. Now, I had one that some of you pushed back on, so I want to start with this one. Do you believe the following statement is true? If you have 2 quarterbacks, you got none. Because I think it's garbage. Selectively, I think it's garbage. But some of you actually believed that. Mainly because your grandpa told you that. No knock on grandpa. We're more of a Meemaw show. Respect grandpa, but, we grew up with Meemaw, around here at least, at Pate State. Meemaw never told me that. Meemaw told me, hey, go recruit as many 5-star quarterbacks as you can, stack them on top of each other, and then let them battle it out. That's what Nick Saban's done. That's what Ryan Day's done. That's what Steve Sarkisian is starting to do. That's what Kirby Smart may be starting to do. Heads up there. Does that mean that there is a maximum of one good quarterback in the room? It must be, because if I got 2 of them fighting it out, apparently I have none. That doesn't make sense. There is no logic that's applied there. We just watched teams at Ohio State that had back-to-back-to-back eventual first-round draft picks at quarterback. Now, was there always a battle in the preseason? No, there wasn't. But if there was, let's just say there was. Let's say that number 2 was a year ahead of developmental schedule. Would that mean that all of a sudden they had none? Of course it wouldn't. They had Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama. Did they have 2 or did they have none? They had Tua and Mac Jones. They had Mac Jones and Bryce Young. Did they have 2 or did they have none? You see where I'm going with that. Now also, ironically enough, speaking of Alabama, this could be one of the first years where someone says, if you got 3 quarterbacks, you got none. I understand where the saying comes from. Maybe we'll apply this to Ohio State this year. Kyle McCord, Devin Brown. Maybe that'll be the fall version of, well, if they had 2 quarterbacks, they ended up having none. I know what it means, and I know sometimes if there is a late fall quarterback battle, it just means no one's separated, which is a bad indicator for how the season's going to go. We've seen that play out. I'm just saying it's not 100% broad brush true. Okay, now here are some of the submissions you gave me. I'm going to go through these quick because we got a whole lot of them. I cannot possibly get to all these. Biggest lies in college football. Playing more conference games matters. This is a hot button issue. It is a lie. It is absolutely a lie, but it's a hot button issue. Now, this is not speaking to my preference. Would I prefer a program in the SEC to play 9 conference games? I guess in a perfect world I would. We've talked about that, as long as on the back end, the committee properly interpreted strength of schedule. But that's really not the crux of that particular lie. The crux of that lie is I got some folks who are playing 9 conference games, screaming at a conference that plays 8 conference games, acting as though they are inferior because they play 8 conference games. And, anyone, again, of logical, sound mind should look at that and say, well, regardless of whether you play 8 or 9, what's your strength of schedule? And then people just put their fingers in their ears and they scream, la, 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 can't hear you. I don't know why, because that's actually what's supposed to matter. The amount of conference games you play was this metric that was sort of conjured up lately. I've heard it more lately to maybe come at strength of schedule from a different angle. Of course, you can't come at it from the pure strength of schedule metric angle because the SEC is going to dominate you pretty much every time. So instead, you can just make things up. And you can come at it from the angle of, oh, how many conference games do you play? 8? And sometimes you got an FCS team on that schedule? Trash. Not quite trash. Not quite trash after all. So I do think that is an accurately listed lie here. What about stars don't matter? I hear it all the time. I know some of you have trafficked in this. This is not, by the way, a segment that is meant to label you a liar. Liar is habitual in nature. You may have told one of these lies before. You may even believe one of these lies to be truth. Doesn't make you a bad person. It just may put you on the wrong side of one little part of the argument here. Stars don't matter. We all know where this goes. We all know that no one really changes their mind on this. It's kind of like a debate where both sides just become further entrenched. But the evidence here is overwhelming and indisputable. Every signing day, I present you the metrics of going back to the star rankings, and then you fast forward to the NFL draft, and the NFL draft bears out how much more likely you were to be drafted if you were a former 5-star, and then a 4-star, and then a 3-star. It's very obvious. It's very obvious when we turn on a playoff game, we turn on a conference championship game. It's very obvious, by and large, whoever has recruited at a higher level is the team there. Are there exceptions? Certainly there are. But for stars to not matter, for stars to truly not matter, notice the piece of paper doesn't say stars aren't the end-all be-all. That's never the phrase. If you wanted to come at me with that, I'd say, okay, there's some truth to that. No, they skip all the way to the bottom of the barrel, and they say stars don't matter. Well, stars do matter because stars are equal to talent. It's the best talent rating system known to high school football, should I say, and talent matters. Find me a coach who says it doesn't. I'll find you one that's going to be in the unemployment line before too much longer. What about nobody cares about bowl games? This is a lie. This is one of college football's lies. Jesse, who was it you told me put out this stat about the Minnesota-Syracuse Bowl? Was it Mandel? So Stuart Mandel of The Athletic, we think, he's going to get credit for it whether he did it or not, tweeted out recently, the Minnesota versus Syracuse bowl game, whichever bowl they were in, it got better ratings than a Stanley Cup final game. Go Panthers. Minor setback for a major comeback. But people do care about bowl games. This has always been a lie. Even in the opt-out playoff era, this is a lie. The meaningless bowl game era. There's a pesky, inconvenient truth out there for the bowls don't matter crowd. You're still watching them. I know those numbers aren't lying to me. You're still watching them. Bowls don't matter crowd. No, bowls may matter less to someone out there, but bowls don't matter or nobody cares about bowl games. Never has been true, isn't true today, never will be true. National championship games have to be played on a Monday. Huge lie. Monumental lie. This is one that pretty much everyone rallies around, by the way. I don't know where we're going in the future with this, but it have I ever said this word before? No. It galls me to no end when we have to roll into a venue on a Monday night, or when the college football public, have your entire weekend, then you go to work on a Monday, and then you got the title game that night, and then they expect you to just show up the next day, even though we know good and well that thing went after midnight on the East Coast. What sense does this make? Well, in your world and my world, none. But we wear white T-shirts every day. It's not our world that this makes sense in. It makes sense in the world that doesn't want to compete against the NFL because they want to maximize viewership, which obviously maximizes the ad dollar that you can make putting it up against the game. And this makes sense, of course. I'm not ignorant. I'm not stupid to all this. Neither are you. It's just that you and I don't really care. We don't view college football as hurting for money because it's not. And we view college football as a Saturday game. And therefore, we would love our championship to be decided on a Saturday, the day of the week in which our sport is synonymous with. Instead, someone in a suit worth more than our entire wardrobe came along and said, nope, we know better than you. This has got to be on a Monday night for reasons that you wouldn't understand if we told you. I think we understand it. We just don't like it. Next big lie in college football. Kind of goes hand in hand with the last one. College football can't be successful without trying to get as close to the NFL as possible. It's where a lot of this stems from. It's also where a lot of the changes in the sport are coming from. It is in an effort to push the sport more in line with the NFL. There's also this school of thought out there. You've heard it before. Maybe you've trafficked in it. I try and avoid this. But you've heard before there be an argument at a college football table, and all of a sudden someone from way in the back walks up and says, well, it works in the NFL. So do trades. Would you like trades in college football? Well, an expanded playoff works in the NFL. Well, they take one bid from every division in the NFL. Cool. Because it works in the NFL. Because the NFL is built on a totally equitable platform in a league that is built solely to play football. These are colleges. Some have been around 100 years more than the other. Some football programs have existed 100 years more than the other. Some of them have 500% the academic and athletic and financial resource that the other does. So there's not a whole lot of equitable foundation college football is built on, and therefore maybe what applies to the NFL doesn't always apply to college football. Doesn't matter. See what I said 10 minutes ago. It's got to fit on a bumper sticker, or it's got to fit on that piece of paper inside a fortune cookie, and if you can't fit it on that, it's not a valid argument. Well, it works for the NFL. Well, they do it in the NFL. I don't really care, nor have I ever. College football was just fine before that mentality came along to me. Recruiting doesn't matter in June. Huge lie. They're telling it to you right now. Selectively, they're telling it to you. Of course, a Florida fan is all in on recruiting in June. Why? Because they've been red hot. But I've watched some of the reaction to Florida being red hot. I've been on the wrong end of some of that reaction, because I've properly given Florida their credit for being top 5 in the 24/7 Sports team recruiting rankings right now. And some people have come at me, as I told you they would, and they've said, doesn't matter. Recruiting doesn't matter. Not only do star rankings not matter, but commitments don't matter in June. Now, of course, this is a lie. Total lie. Total fabrication. I've put the challenge out that anyone that wants to bet me on that class falling apart, or any class falling apart unless a coach gets fired, be my guest. Shockingly, no one has stepped up. As of 7:15 Central Time, Thursday evening, not a single person. As of this morning, this was the #1 college football pod on the planet. Not a single person in that entire audience has stepped up to challenge me. Why? Because you know, if you're the one saying it, that it's a lie. Those commitments mean a lot. Doesn't mean they're ironclad, nor have I ever said they are. There will be decommitments. Certainly there will. And nothing is official until pen is on paper. I know all that. But you didn't say that. You said commitments don't mean anything. And you're very dismissive of them when they happen in June, which first off indicates you're not following the modern direction of college football. This is the hot recruiting season now. June and July is where it's at. June and July is what January used to be because of the changes in the recruiting calendar. Ask coaching staffs how they're structuring their summer vacations, the ones that can actually take them. They're not taking them at the same time as they used to. You know why? The calendar's not the same as it used to be. These commitments mean a whole lot. Whole lot. You got early enrollees. You didn't used to have that, at least in the bulk that we have it now. And so they mean a lot. 85 to 90% of these commitments generically across the board are going to stick. They mean a lot. We had one person who submitted this as a lie, and I don't really know what it means, but I'm going to read it for you. Quote, recruiting services are a lie. It's getting pretty greasy behind the scenes. Do we think he's talking about Wiltfong? Cooper? He does use a lot of product in that hair. Couldn't be me. Ivans? Greasy? No. This was hurtful. This was slanderous. I've got to stand up for our folks. And the folks down the road at the other shops, I got to stand up for them. Pretty good people. I know all of them. You know, I would love to traffic in some good old-fashioned gossip about these people if I could, but I can't. I kid you not. Last year, I went to breakfast with Wiltfong and someone else, and I had to get up and leave. This is a true story. I got up from that table because all they were doing was talking about a 3-star safety from Noonan, Georgia. And I got up. I said, I got to tap out. I went and negotiated my contract outside the restaurant. We were in Manhattan Beach, California. Beautiful morning. I just went and said, I got some free time. I'm going to finalize my contract. And I came back to the table. They were still talking about the same thing. It's exactly as you would expect it to be. Unless, of course, you expect it to be pretty greasy behind the scenes. It's not greasy. It's not greasy. I don't know what it used to be like, but as long as I've been here, it's not greasy. Here's a big lie. Neutral site games are good for college football. Never have been, never will be. They're good for the host city. They are. Orlando, Florida will benefit from Florida State versus LSU being there on a Sunday night to start the season. We won't necessarily. We'll benefit from seeing the teams play. But you save that for late December or January. Of course, the exceptions here are, like the Cotton Bowl, OU, Texas, always exempt from any neutral site criticism that you hear from me. Anyone can coach a team of 5 stars. Do you believe this? Because it is a lie. Do you believe that talent is the end-all, be-all? Once you have talent in the door, anyone could coach that talent to a win. Anyone could do what Kirby Smart's doing. Anyone could do what Nick Saban's doing. Well, let me remind you of a couple of things. First off, you're high, if you think that. Secondly, one of the reasons you're high is because part of their job is acquiring the talent. That's like saying, well, anyone could race this car you just built. Did you miss the part where I built it? That's the first. Even if that argument was valid, it's invalidated by the first part. But then the second part is, have you ever stopped to consider the new mountain of problems you have when you have 5-star talent? You ever been around a bunch of elite people doing anything, sweeping a floor, much less playing college football? If you've ever been around them, this can happen on your coaching staff too. If you've never been around it, I am around it sometimes, and especially get to talk to people who are around it. Here's what happens. You get a new can of worms opened that you never knew existed. It's kind of like when you win championships and everyone thinks you're just going to be on cloud 9 and autopilot your way through the next decade and a half, and then all of a sudden you find out, wait, success brings about its own set of problems. We call them the consequences of success on this show. Well, acquiring a ton of talent and expecting all of those kids to operate like robots never works. Now, you got to acquire the talent. It's the great necessary evil sometimes in college football. You know what's going to happen sometimes if you stack too much of it, but yet you're so paranoid about injury, about transfer portal defection, and about someone else getting them that you stack as many of them as you can. Then sometimes you get them in the locker room and human nature happens. And all of a sudden you realize, it turns out that it is a little more difficult to coach this locker room full of 5 stars than I thought. It turns out we got problems here that maybe they're not dealing with at Minnesota because of our talent level. No one's going to feel sorry for you, of course. No one feels sorry for the Nick Sabans of the world or the Kirby Smarts of the world or the Dabos of the world. If they deal with that stuff, doesn't mean they don't deal with it, though. So no, you couldn't coach a team of 5 stars to a title just because you got a team full of 5 stars. How about this one? If you aren't competing for a national championship, your games aren't relevant. This would kind of fall into the phrase meaningless November game, which we've heard more and more, like a stain on college football. It's mixed its way into the common phraseology of the college football public. Your games mean a lot. If you're playing a football game on a Saturday, it means a lot. It means you're competing. It's a word that is important to some people, mainly competitors. Sometimes I like to talk to the college audience because we've got a really big college audience. And a lot of times I know you guys have grown up in the playoff era. Largely, you can probably remember back before the playoff, but you've come of age, like your childhood, you'll look back on as overlapping with the initial playoff era, the 14 playoff era. And so you will also have come up in a world where phrases like meaningless bowl game, phrases like meaningless November game, concepts like opting out of bowl games really materialized. And I'm sorry. Actually, I take no blame. It's not my fault. I just want the credit. I don't want the blame. But you are familiar with that. What you guys aren't so familiar with is there was this time in like 2003, 2007, as recently as 2009 or 10, where if North Carolina were randomly playing Wake Forest second week in November, and they're both 5-5, the game meant everything. It didn't have a worldwide television audience necessarily, but if you were to be around the programs the week of the game, if you were to be around the fan bases the week of the game, it just meant everything. And it wasn't even necessarily tied to this greater overarching postseason vision. If you were to ask those folks, why is your face painted? Why is your chest painted? Why didn't you sleep last night? Why have you been up since 4 a.m.? Why are you already a little inebriated as you're walking into the stadium for a noon kickoff? They'd tell you, well, they'd look at you as if you were insane, and they would say, what do you mean, why? We're North Carolina. We're playing Wake Forest today. Like, what other reason do you need? It used to just be that simple. It didn't matter if you were in the playoff race. It would be great to be in it. But a lot of fan bases were logically very realistic about their place in the sport. And so, to like a Wake Forest that given year, them challenging to go to a bowl game or to get to 7 or 8 wins, that was tantamount to LSU competing for a national championship. Why? Because relative to the program's stature, one achievement would have been equal to the other achievement. Then we got in the playoff era, and somebody came in and said, no, it's all about the playoff, and if you're not in the playoff race, then your games are meaningless. So, that Wake Forest, North Carolina 5-5 versus 5-5 game, meaningless. Yeah, that was great. That was wonderfully healthy for the sport. It was garbage is what it was. I never participated, but some people did. I don't think many people on this show actually participated. Those are some of the big lies in college football. I mean, there was another one on here. I can't even finish this list. The 2020 season didn't count. This has become popularized lately. It's used when advantageous. I've noticed if anyone wants to discount someone's recent successes and they were successful in 2020, they just say, well, yeah, that was the COVID year. Or if you were bad in 2020, yeah, but that was the COVID year. I've been guilty of this. But I've never said it didn't count. But I have, when advantageous, to a point I'm trying to make, I've dismissed 2020 a little bit. It was a weird year, but it counted. It counted because, at least from the surface viewpoint, everyone was dealing with the same thing. Now, as I've said, COVID disproportionately affected one locker room to the other a whole lot more than any other given year's external factors would. But the 2020 season does count. They're not taking those records away. They're not taking those trophies away. So those are some of the big lies that we came up with. I think the comment section will be very, very entertaining when I look at it at the end of this video. Fun times, though. You got to call those liars out when you see them. Remember, someone saying a lie doesn't automatically equal them being a liar unless they just rattle off everyone on that list, in which case, put the X on their forearm. They're a liar. We got to get them out of here.